Ko Dennis O'Rourke.
Mr Speaker, New Zealand First will also support the bill as far as the Select Committee at least. And I would like to say this at the beginning, that it's always very difficult to agree to the loss of reserve land, because the whole point of land being reserved is to stop the sort of ad hoc reversal of that status that we're actually seeing in this case. It's very easy to take reserves away. It is almost impossible to get them back. So New Zealand First is very concerned about the loss of such a large part of this reserve. 18 hectares is about a third of the total if you take into account the 45 hectares altogether plus another 3 hectares of adjacent council land, about a third. So it's a big chunk of a very big reserve. And even though that 18 hectares is already fenced off for grazing and is not being used for recreation, that does not mean that it would not be needed in the future, and that it should not be kept as a reserve for that purpose for the longer term future. That indeed is the very reason why reserves exist. And reserves of that particular size are very hard to come by, so its loss must be very seriously considered. So New Zealand First will support this proposal only to the Select Committee stage at this point of time. We want to hear what people affected or who have whatever it is to say on this particular proposal. We want to hear their submissions, and we then want to decide rather than try to make a final decision right now. So New Zealand First is very concerned about the loss of such an important area of reserve land, but we are also extremely concerned about the chronic need for more housing land in Auckland, and especially for the provision of smaller sections for modest, lower-cost homes, and even more especially provision for social housing and state housing. This land clearly is suitable for that. It's close to public transport and it's close to central Auckland, so we'd have no difficulties in that respect. In fact, New Zealand First policy is for direct government intervention in the housing market, both to provide state housing and for sections and homes at the lower end of the scale, because we feel that commercial developers provide well only at the high end of the scale and not the lower end. So there tends to be a big gap not met by the market. And that leaves far too many Kiwis without homes that they can buy or to rent for reasonable rentals. And of course, we say that this is all greatly exacerbated by the scale of immigration which has been allowed by this government over several years. Massive immigration which can only have a very adverse effect on an already troubled housing market. That scale of immigration is quite clearly and definitely opposed by New Zealand First. But that's not the subject of this bill. This bill otherwise is consistent with our policy to use suitable Crown land or local authority land for housing. We would set up a commercial entity which we would call Kiwi Housing to acquire land, and where appropriate to use existing housing land to create a land bank where demand clearly exceeds supply for sustainable residential development. And we would want that entity to control all aspects of that development, aimed at delivering smaller, high-quality new homes with appropriate land densities to provide good social and transport outcomes, and to optimise the use of prefabricated homes to minimise costs. So we'd get smaller, cheaper, good quality homes. And in addition to that, we'd sell residential sections on the basis of a long-term agreement for sale and purchase up to 25 years to first home buyers, with a low interest rate on other terms and conditions which would make it easy for people to buy their first home. Mr Speaker, this particular bill is similar to the Record and Racecourse Bill which the Minister mentioned. It was passed recently with New Zealand First support, because there the reserve for racing and other purposes was also preserved. But that proposal did have excellent public consultation, which showed significant public support. New Zealand First's continued support would depend on excellent public consultation, in this case demonstrating significant public support. And in the case of the Point England land, there is good reason to believe that there may be such support and that the adjacent recreation reserves would not be affected, and that there are no unsettled treaty settlement barriers and no barriers to the offer-back requirements which would remain in place. So New Zealand First looks forward to the public consultation just to see what else might come out of the woodwork, what other problems there might be, whatever people might think about the proposal in any respect. Because we need to be assured that there are no significant unknown barriers to the proposal, and we would need to be satisfied that low cost or social housing will be provided as an essential and definite and achievable result of this proposal. We do presume at this stage that that will be the case. We do note, however, that the proposal will allow only for about 300 homes when Auckland needs 140,000 homes within the next 10 years. That's a huge number to provide for. We know that this government has failed dismally to come up with anything like a comprehensive plan to address the scale of that need. This particular proposal is only a drop in the bucket compared to the magnitude of the demand caused by the national policy's inaction and its open-door immigration policies. So this proposal is a drop in the bucket, but nevertheless in itself is worth supporting. So for that reason, New Zealand First will support it. As far as the Select Committee will then hear what people have to say and make a final decision.